Hear what the federal government is plotted out and has already initiated, but we want to talk about accessing that and plugging into that. So no one better than Ron Sims. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
Thank you. It's great to be here today, and it's great to be back in Gary, Indiana. I want to say it's good to see Mayor Clay. Again, I've been here several times, and he's always been gracious and determined for New Gary. I also wish to acknowledge Congressman Wiskoski, who's been superb, Senator Lugar, and the unrelenting presence of Senator Bai, who on a number of occasions has used the various senatorial prerogatives to command our attention about a community he's concerned about, northern Indiana, and Gary in particular as a place of leading catalytic change. So it is really, really great to be here. I know a number of people here and that have come today, and they're all very formidable and are people of innovation and imagination. So I'll kind of tell you where the federal government is going. And I also wanted to thank Mary Sue Barrett. She's been You have no idea. When I was talking about Senator Bai being an unrelenting presence there, she is also an unrelenting factor. But it's really you need that, and I'm going to talk about why that's so really, really important. Why that running a marathon at a sprinter's speed is so very, very important. And I want to thank the Times Northwest Media Company for their sponsorship and gathering people here. Let me tell you kind of where the federal government is today. People forget that President Obama was a community organizer. So when he brought a lot of us into his office to talk about how he was going to form his cabinet, his secretaries, and his deputy secretaries, one of the things that he continued to explore was our comfort zone with moving away from what we were, traditionally responsible for, and looking at areas that new partnerships. In King County, we had done that already. We basically realized that we needed to compete with China and Japan in particular, that they were looking at our industries, Microsoft and a variety of high-tech industries, Amazon.com. Starbucks was thinking about moving. We faced the prospect of seeing an area that had grown and had seeded a great deal of potential, that those companies were global and could move in a minute. And that in a competitive world, they would not be reluctant to move to larger markets with more talent. So it wasn't the fact that Microsoft was in King County. The key was that we realized that India had engineers and well-trained engineers, that China had engineers, well-trained engineers, and a larger market. And there was every incentive for them to leave. So what they basically said is, ensure our quality of life. Ensure it. And ensure it for a long period of time. And so we realized that it wasn't, I was the elected head of a regional government, King County. We were one of the largest governments in the United States, and our issue was, let's stop the fighting between cities and counties. Make no sense. When people drive through King County, they didn't know when they were in Seattle and then in Renton and in Tuckwell, and they didn't care. They just knew that there was a road through there, that maybe they would want to live there, maybe they didn't want to live there, but they did not differentiate. Dirty air doesn't stop at a city jurisdiction. Poverty doesn't stop at a city jurisdiction. Crime doesn't stop at a city jurisdiction. Everything moves around. So it was our key is to begin to break down all of those silos, that one wants to call them, all of those traditions, and move on a regional basis with a common goal. And we did that by formulating with the business community, the philanthropic community, and all the governments and the faith-based community. And it was key for us. So I'll tell you what happened. When the president said to us, King County has 1.8 million people in it. When people say it's an urban county, actually we're the 5th largest rural county in our state. Because people don't realize that we confined our growth to urban areas, but we have a lot of forest and agriculture that is there by law and preservation and code. It cannot be touched because we didn't want to de-link what we call our rural areas and our forest areas and our agricultural community from what we call the essentials of urban sustainability. So when I met Secretary Donovan, I remember I had a variety of choices at that time, and I remember liking him. And I liked him because he said, can we get out of silos? He was in New York, and he was as frustrated as I would. How can you talk about housing and not talk about transportation? How can we not talk about transportation and housing and not talk about clean air issues? So he immediately set out to say that we were going to have formal agreements, that we were going to be a new HUD. We were going to be a development agency, not a housing agency, and that we would look at our partners and begin to figure out how to mobilize our efforts in a sane, rational way. When I was King County executive, I used to say, why doesn't USDOT talk to HUD? My God, we got HUD over here, USDOT over here. We had conflicting rules and regulations. We couldn't even do transit-oriented developments without putting a lot of our local money in because USDOT's rules made it impossible for us to build affordable housing into a TOD project. Now that's not the case because the first thing the Secretary Donovan said is, can you change your rules so that we can have affordable housing in transit-oriented development projects? And the rules were changed to allow that and make it cost-efficient to do so. So what he did is we have a series of formalized agreements. And it means that our staff on a weekly basis must talk to EPA's sustainability staff, USDOT's sustainability staff, U.S. Department of Agriculture's sustainability staff, CDC's sustainable staff, because they're now arguing and have proven that the built environment is a health factor. We used to talk about smoking and obesity, but we could say if you're not in a walkable community, you will be obese. And so you need to talk about the consequences of the built environment. We have a formalized agreement with the Department of Energy, and we're working on that with some other departments, particularly now the Department of Labor. And the idea is, as we announced last week, a series of grants. For the first time, you could write one grant and qualify for U.S. Department of Housing funding and USDOT funding. Never happened before. But the signal we're sending is those grants have got to be regional. We want integrated plans. And so I tell you what we're looking for in this process. I was asked yesterday at the end of this meeting, what would be attractive to the federal government? And I will be brutally blunt. I'm not normally that way, but you may say, God, he's a really softy, but I will. Let me tell you what we look for. We have demands all over the United States. One of my job as Deputy Secretary is to travel to places who always have a wish list, a big wish list, help define our community, help grow our community. And so there are things that we look for that tell us that a region is ready to go. Ready for federal investment, ready so that we can tell the president and tell Congress that there was a return on investment with the money they spent. So I will tell you what those factors are. We look at how do they handle the assets they have. So here you have some natural assets in the region. You have an airport. You have water access. You have a greenway. You have a university, which is key. You have a commuter rail presence. And what we're looking for is a desire for change, because it comes down to that political will and business will on a regional basis, so that people will not say, my city is better than your city. The issue is whether the region will be better off after all the actions are undertaken. So what I would hope that in the end, after the end of the day, people will say, here is a series of priorities, and here is our blueprint, and we're wedded to the blueprint. Because if you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. Anybody can walk aimlessly. I've done that. I mean, when I want to escape my day, which is often now, I just walk. People say, where? I don't understand this idea. When I'm tired, I'll go back the other direction. But nonetheless, that isn't something that moves or drives success. So what I would tell you is you have to have a blueprint. Where are you going? What are the trade-offs you're willing to make, and are you capitalizing on your natural assets that are already here? Do you have the discipline? And that's really key, because if people are going to invest, they're going to look and say, am I in a disciplined environment? Is it going to be money well spent, money accounted for? Is it going to be money that is targeted to make a difference? So when we look at grant applications, and we got a lot of them, we got over 1,000 grant applications on sustainability loans, and another and another 700 on what we call the HUD grants, and then there was even more on the USDOT grants. There's a lot of people out there, and we've got to filter through all of those jurisdictions to say who are we going to invest in? So that's what we'll look for. Is there a plan? Is there a plan? Is there a regional plan? So does the plan that will evolve today also be in the context of what is the regional need going to be and how will the region be defined? I've always said Gary is a place of great opportunity. And the reason why, it's a canvas. I mean, here's your choice. You can sculpt like Henry Moore. You can paint like Monet or Picasso or Jacob Lawrence. Or you can look like Ron Sims's fingerprinting when he was in third grade, which was elusive of form, content, and coordinated color. But the key for us is that that's what you see here. Some people say, well, look at all the buildings that need to be torn down. I look and say, then how would you rebuild new neighborhoods? That's what it's about. How do you build a new neighborhood? Okay? When you look at how your commercial area, what should be there, what should no longer be there, what kind of businesses should you attract, and you have a university, and the issue is, how will you integrate a university, which many places do not have, and say, wow, this is an effective resource? So that's what we're going to be looking for, and the choice is yours. We can't, the demands on us are too great, are so great. We have to have that performance. We spent $7 billion on NSP funds. Gary, Indiana got 3.8 in the first round and another 2.7 in our last round. Lakes County got 5.7 million in our first run and 1.6 million in our last. And our issue is, do they get obligated? Do they get dispersed? And did they move the ball? In King County, which was a remarkable place in any sense, 8th richest county in the United States, after we backed out the income of 48 billionaires. 2 of them really blew our data, actually 3 of them. One was Bill Gates, who is a nation. So as a result, in order to have a mean average that meant something to us, we backed them out. We were still the 8th richest county in the United States. But we did something else, and this goes back to our issue of what we want to see on drill downs, even in the HUD grants and the USDOT grants. I was back here at a ceremony, and I asked my kids, because I couldn't go to it, to go to a press conference at the Joint Center. And this press conference only said, I remember telling my kids, go to this press conference and bring back all the paper you can. All the paper you can. He said, how do you know there's going to be paper, Dad? I said, this is Washington, D.C. It's a press conference. There's always lots of paper. But don't bring me any duplicates, because I don't have that many boxes. So they came back with a report. And the report simply said that 35% of African-American males in the United States under the age of 25 would not have anything in common with the rest of the country except their death. That's it. And I said, whoa. My God, and my kid said to me, oh, Dad, this is this inner city stuff, big inner city stuff. So I went back and said, well, to our demographers and said, I got this report. Can you tell me what's happening in King County? And it was really interesting. It took them 18 months. And the more they got into the report, the more excited they got. So here's what we found out after 18 months. We found out the high water mark for African Americans was 1970. Now, this is the same county that had a black mayor, Norm Rice, an African American county executive, Ron Sims, a launch pad for an Asian governor, Gary Locke, who was governor, but who was previously, he preceded me as county executive. So we birthed, for the first time in the United States, the 3 principal executive offices were held by people of color, the first time in U.S. history. But here's what our county did. In our county, we found out that the high water mark for African Americans in 1970, 50% home ownership, 48% 2 parents in the household. In 2006, it was 32% home ownership, 28% 2 parents in the household. Latinos had as dramatic a fall. Subgroups of Asians, Filipinos, and Pacific Islanders also had a fall, and urban Native Americans never had a high water mark ever. They had a 41% infant mortality rate in 2006 in our county. But the thing that was more disconcerting is we could predict all of this by zip code. HUD's mission is that zip codes are going to be an address but never again a life determinant. They will never determine the lifetime earnings of children, which can be predicted by zip code. Rates of tooth decay by zip codes. Morbidity rates by zip codes. Rates of arrest and incarceration by zip codes. And so what we're looking for are those communities wishing to look at this we call disparate zip codes and tackle those issues, which are hard. They're called school issues. Give me a good school, I can turn any community around. Give me a bad school, and I can build all of the wonderful housing in the world around it. And if people can afford to send their kids to private school, they will if they have a dysfunctional school in their neighborhood. Schools must work. They must be innovative. They must move forward. We cannot do it anymore without strong schools. We cannot compete in the 20th century, in the 21st century, without strong schools. So we'll look and say, disparate neighborhoods tell us what their schools are doing. Are they innovative and imaginative? Are they based upon the old agrarian system, or are they moving forward? And the president has been relentless on this issue, as has Secretary Sean Donovan and as am I today. We're going to look and say, how do you rebuild those neighborhoods so that they're walkable and they're safe? Do not tell me about obesity and not give me a walkable neighborhood. Because people want to walk in a neighborhood that looks safe to them, especially when you get to my age, because sight lines are important. Is the person coming at me friend or foe, friendly or not? That's really, really important. The commitment, as Mary Clay has said, to reducing crime is going to be critical in all of these communities, every single community. Safe communities are communities that are vibrant and sustainable. We're going to look for green communities, green in garden, green in building design. We're going to look for pathways. Are you willing to put in parks? If you talk about childhood obesity, which will crush the healthcare system of America if the data now moves forward for another 20 years in regards to the number of people who are obese, we look and say, good, if you are within a quarter mile of a park as a child, you're not going to be obese. If you're within a half mile, you'll be not obese, but more inclined to. If you're 3/4 of a mile or a mile from a park, you will be obese. Do not talk to me about gyms. My kids were ballers. Gyms are cruel exercises. You either come with game or you don't play. So our issue is, what other things do kids do that they can recreate, run, walk, ride bikes, just play with their friends who have their peer level skills. But it's going to be important for us to see that examined. That's what a blueprint does. It says, here's our parks, here's our schools, here's the jobs we want, here's what our neighborhoods will look like, here's what our cities will look like, here's how the region's going to look like. It is a path, and it is a marathon at a sprinter's pace, but you've got to be disciplined and not chase something new. I mean, goodness gracious, we have a lot of American cities that always have a new idea of what they want to be. It's called recast and recast and recast. They will recast till the cows come home, and they'll never be vibrant again. The issue is to make the tough decisions and say, we're going to gamble on this blueprint, on this stream, and we're going to execute it with precision. Precision. Discipline will be critical. And so when we look at our grants, everything I've told you are the people we funded. We do. We love funding them. Do we know it's going to work? We have no idea, but we know one thing. All of the ingredients of their success are embedded. And so we can look and say, they are committed to a future. And in closing, I always put things in the context of my granddaughter. She's 7 years old, will be 8 in 1 month, and she's perfect. Mm-hmm. You know, my son will say to me, I cannot believe you gave her ice cream and cake for breakfast. I said, she asked for it. He said, but you didn't let us have it. I said, I'm not raising her. You know, she's with me. I spoil her rotten. Then I send her home to her parents. But when she is 34 and makes a decision at that time for a permanent relationship, and when she decides, if she wishes to have a family, I want her to look back and because she's going to be in the most competitive century in the history of humankind. I mean, let's look at the odds. China will have more people, therefore more geniuses. India will have more people and more geniuses. And in order for us to compete, it has to be all hands on deck. So when she looks, I want her to be able to say that we were smart with our resources, sustainable and focused with vibrant communities, that we didn't have any more places to pull up because every city was operating at its premium and every person who needed to be educated was educated. That is what's at stake. We're the only country in the history of humankind without that it achieved military and economic superiority without a common gene pool. All of us got here by boat, plane, and land bridge. We're humankind's grand experiment. So the decisions you're making about Gary are whether Gary will endure in the 21st century. But you're not alone, because we've seen Akron go through this process and come out the other end. We have seen it. We know that it works. We have seen other cities now roll up their sleeves and come out the other end. And the issue, will you be left behind? The answer is yes, you will be cruelly left behind if we do not have a blueprint and a regional plan in regards to many of the aspects that I raised today. But I look at this group and say the collective genius of this room will get you there. I am utterly convinced. The talent here is amazing. I'm embarrassed to be here because everybody here is smarter than I am. So I just get to look and smile and say, wow, I cannot wait to see what you come out with at the end. So I wish you well. But what's at stake is who wins and who loses in the 21st century. And who is willing, when you're on the 1-yard line with 3 seconds left and you're 1 point down and the Super Bowl's at stake, and it comes down to guts, it comes down to heart, it comes down to backbone, and most of all, it comes down to desire. Will Gary get across that goal line? Will it? It's up to all of you. We look forward to being on your team. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I suspected Ron would help us set exactly the right tone for the day. As you can tell, he's had a ton of experiences that he draws from every day, and those tough decisions about where to invest, where to take those gambles, are in the places that are ready to sprint. So we want to be one of those places here. We're going to patch in our next panelist for a brief contribution to our conversation. While Derek Douglas from the White House Domestic Policy Council could not be with us today, he very much wanted to participate, and we've got him. This is Derek. Welcome, Derek. We've got your picture on the screen, and Derek's on the line with us. So I think we're going to just spend a few minutes